The cold woke me before the danger did. Not the cold of winter or a broken heater. Something older, something that pressed against my skin like the air itself had turned predatory. I opened my eyes to darkness and found two things I couldn't explain: a figure standing at the foot of my bed, and something else crouched beside it, holding perfectly, unnaturally still. The figure at the foot of my bed was tall. Too tall for the room. Her head nearly brushed the ceiling, and she wore armor that seemed to drink the shadows rather than reflect them. Layered plates of something that wasn't metal, moving slightly with her breathing like the scales of a living thing. 4 eyes, arranged in a vertical column down her face, glowed a pale amber that cast just enough light for me to see the room. She was watching the crouching shape beside my bed with the focused intensity of someone who had already decided what to do and was only waiting for the right moment. The crouching shape was watching me. I didn't move. I don't know why. Some deep brain instinct told me that moving would end things faster than staying still, and I listened to it with every cell I had. The crouching thing was humanoid, but wrong in the way a reflection is wrong. Proportions slightly off, fingers too long, neck extended just past the point of comfort. Its skin was the color of old ash, and its eyes, when they caught the amber glow from the tall woman's gaze, reflected nothing back. Absolute black. The kind of black that doesn't absorb light so much as erase it. It was leaning toward my neck. The tall woman moved one hand. A single gesture, 2 fingers extended, and the crouching thing froze. Not flinched. Not hesitated. Froze, like a machine cut from power mid-motion. Then, it turned its head toward her. What passed between them in the next 4 seconds wasn't sound. I felt it more than heard it. A pressure against my eardrums, a vibration in my back teeth, the sense of language happening at a frequency I wasn't built to process. The tall woman's 4 eyes narrowed, top pair and bottom pair closing slightly while the middle 2 held steady. Her jaw tightened. The crouching thing tilted its head, a gesture that would have looked curious on a dog and looked like a threat on this. I realized I was holding my breath. I released it, slowly, through my nose, and the crouching thing's head snapped toward me so fast I felt the displaced air. The tall woman stepped between us. She didn't lunge. She didn't reach for a weapon. She simply moved, one smooth step, placing herself between my bed and the crouching figure with the calm precision of someone executing a maneuver they had rehearsed 10,000 times. Her back was to me now. She was 3 feet tall above my mattress line, her armored shoulders wide enough that I couldn't see the crouching thing at all. I sat up. I don't know why I did that either. My hands found the edge of the sheets and I pushed myself upright, back against the headboard, and I stared at the back of her armor and tried to understand what was happening in my bedroom at what my phone's dim screen told me was 3:14 in the morning. The pressure in my teeth intensified. The tall woman raised her right hand, palm flat, facing the crouching thing. The gesture had weight to it. Authority. Not a plea. Not a warning. A command delivered through the body, absolute and calm. The crouching thing made a sound then. It wasn't loud. It was almost gentle, a low, resonant click that I felt in my sternum more than my ears. It was the sound of something unhappy with its options, calculating, deciding. I watched the tall woman's shoulders. She didn't tense. She didn't shift her weight. She breathed, slow and measured, and her armor moved with her, and she waited. The crouching thing clicked again. Once. Shorter. Then, it was gone. No movement. No door. No window. It was simply present one moment and absent the next, and the cold in the room dropped another 10 degrees before slowly, over the course of about 30 seconds, beginning to return to normal. The tall woman stood with her back to me for a long moment after it vanished. Her hand lowered. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, the smallest possible concession to relief from someone who had trained themselves not to show it. Then, she turned around, all 4 eyes settling on my face, and I understood 3 things simultaneously. She had been here before I woke up. She had known what was coming. And she had not been here to protect the room. She had been here to protect me. She didn't speak first. She studied me the way someone studies a structural problem, not coldly, but precisely, looking for the thing that mattered most before committing to words. Her 4 eyes moved across my face in sequence, top to bottom, then held at my eyes. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy something in her calculation. When she finally spoke, the language was not one I knew. But The translator clipped to the underside of her collar piece, a small disc of something that looked like compressed smoke, caught her words and rendered them in flat, accented English half a beat after she said them. You are unharmed. It wasn't a question. Yeah, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. What was that thing? She considered the question as though deciding how much of the answer I was ready for. Ovelshor. You would have no word for it. In your mythology, the closest approximation is vampire, but the comparison is incomplete and mostly wrong. Mostly, I said. The consumption is similar. The mechanism is not. I looked at the space where the thing had been crouching. The air there still felt different, thinner, somehow, like the presence had taken some essential quality of the atmosphere with it when it left. What does it actually consume? She paused. The translator hummed faintly while she chose her words. Continuity, she said at last. The coherence of a living mind across time. A human stripped by a Velshar does not die immediately. They continue. But, each day, they remember slightly less of who they were. The process takes approximately 14 of your months. The room was very quiet. And, you stopped it, I said. I interrupted it. It will not return tonight. Whether it returns at all depends on variables I am still assessing. I looked at her properly for the first time, not with fierce-kin eyes but actual attention. The armor was extraordinary up close. Each plate overlapped the next with a precision that made manufactured things look crude by comparison. And, along the edges, very faint bioluminescent lines pulsed in a slow rhythm that matched her breathing. She was not young, whatever her species measured age by. There was something in the set of her posture, the economy of her movement, that only came from decades of discipline refined past the point of effort. Who are you? I asked. My name is not pronounceable in your language without damaging your palate. You may use the title. I am called the Vaesoreth. She paused while the translator handled that. It means, approximately, first blade of the Queen's house. You're a royal guard. I am the royal guard. There is only one at any given time. I processed that. And, what are you doing in my bedroom? The four eyes held steady. Executing my duty. I'm not royalty. No, she agreed. But, the Queen asked me to stand watch over you, and the Queen's word is my purpose. So here I am. Ich zerde her. Why does the Queen of, whoever you are, why does she care about me? The first blade was quiet for a moment that lasted just long enough to tell me the question was complicated. Because 3 months ago, you saved her daughter's life. And, the Queen does not forget. The memory hit me with physical force. 3 months ago. A child. A park. A storm drain. I'd been walking home from a late shift when I heard the sound. Small, panicked, the kind of sound that bypasses thought and goes straight to the body. I found her wedged in a drainage grate during a flash flood, water rising fast, and I hadn't thought. I'd just gone in. The water had been chest high and moving hard, and I'd cut my hands on the grate pulling it open, and I'd lifted her out and gotten her to high ground, and she'd stared at me with enormous eyes that I'd assumed, at the time, were just unusually striking. They hadn't been human eyes. I'd been too flooded with adrenaline to fully process it. The child had been wrapped in something that read as a raincoat, and I'd been focused on the water and the grate and getting both of us breathing, and afterwards she'd been collected by tall, urgent figures, and I'd gone home and showered and told myself I'd imagined the strangeness of her eyes. She was the princess, I said. The crown daughter, the first blade corrected. The distinction matters in our system. She is the only heir. She was alone in a park during a flood. A security failure that was addressed with significant consequence. Something moved behind the first blade's composed expression. Just briefly. She is prone to movement without announcement. It has been a recurring challenge. The edge in that sentence told me everything about how that particular challenge had felt from where the first blade stood. Is she all right? I asked. The question seemed to do something to the first blade's posture. Not much, barely a degree of change in how she held herself, but I caught it. She is well. She asked after you. Repeatedly. A pause. She has a strong sense of obligation for one so young. How old is she? 11 of your years. Though our years are longer. I thought about a child, 11 years old, wedged in a flooding storm drain, and how quietly terrified she must have been, and something in my chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with the night's other horrors. She was very calm when I pulled her out, I said. I thought she was in shock. She was trained not to panic in crisis situations. She has been trained since she could walk. The First Blade's voice didn't change, but something in the cadence shifted. She told me afterward that you spoke to her while you worked, that you kept talking so she would know you were still there. I didn't remember doing that, but I probably had. I talk when I'm scared. She remembered every word, the First Blade said. The night moved toward dawn with the slow reluctance of nights that have held too much. The First Blade did not sit. She stood near the window, one hand resting against the wall at a height that would have meant nothing for a human, but for her kept her palm near a position I suspected was tactically deliberate, a few inches from a concealed edge I hadn't noticed until the bioluminescent lines along her armor pulsed slightly brighter when she touched the wall. She was monitoring the room's perimeter. Even after the Velshar had gone. Does it come back in daylight? I asked. No. The Velshar cannot sustain cohesion in ultraviolet-rich environments. Your sun is sufficient. She glanced at the window. You have approximately 2 hours before safety is absolute. And then I will need to explain to you what the next several days will require. Something in the way she said it made the back of my neck tighten. Not dread, something more precise than dread. The recognition that things were about to change in ways I hadn't agreed to and couldn't have anticipated. That sounds like more than a simple guard arrangement, I said. The Velshar's presence here was not random. She turned from the window. All 4 eyes found me with that same sequential focus, top to bottom, then settling. It was directed. Someone sent it to you specifically. The question of who and why intersects with questions about the crown daughter that the Queen has been investigating for some time. The room felt smaller suddenly. You're saying someone is using me to get to her. That is one possibility. Another is that someone is sending the Queen a message using you as the medium. A third is that this is retaliation, punishment directed at the Queen through the person she has placed under protection. The First Blade's voice was even, analytical, delivering the possibilities the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, all of it, clearly, without softening. Any of the 3 requires the same immediate response. Which is? She looked at me steadily. You cannot stay here. I looked around my apartment. The bed I'd slept in for 6 years. The shelf of books I'd alphabetized and reorganized 4 times. The mug on the nightstand with the chipped handle I'd kept meaning to replace. The ordinary, unremarkable structure of a life that was no longer, apparently, as unremarkable as I'd believed. Where? I asked. The Queen's vessel. Currently in low orbit. She paused, then added, with what I suspected was a deliberate concession to the weight of the request, it is not permanent. Until the threat is identified and neutralized, it is the safest option available. I looked at the window. The sky outside was beginning to move from black to the deep purple blue that preceded dawn, that threshold color that always felt like a held breath. I saved a child from a storm drain, I said. Yes. And now I'm being asked to board a spaceship. Yes. I exhaled. Give me 10 minutes to pack. Something moved across the First Blade's face. It was fast and carefully controlled, but I caught it. I was watching closely now. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something quieter. The expression of someone who has been prepared for every argument and finds, unexpectedly, that none of them are needed. She gave me a single, slow inclination of her head. Then she turned back to the window, armor plate settling, and resumed watching the perimeter with the steady patience of someone who had stood guard in harder places than this and would stand guard in harder places still, because it was her purpose and her purpose was absolute. I got out of bed and started deciding what to take with me to space. The Queen's vessel was not what I expected, though I couldn't have said what I expected exactly. Something imposing, perhaps. Cold. All function and no grace. What I found, 3 hours later, stepping through a transit point the First Blade activated from what looked like bare wall in my apartment's hallway, was something that felt, almost, like a living thing. The corridors were wide enough for 2 of the First Blade's height to walk abreast, and the walls were the same scaled material as her armor, but warmer here, illuminated from within by bioluminescent patterns that move slowly, almost like breathing. The air tasted faintly of something mineral and clean. Sound moved differently, a softness to the acoustics, like the walls absorbed certain frequencies deliberately. There were other crew. They moved through the corridors with the same economy of motion the first blade used, and they registered my presence with glances that were curious but not alarmed. The first blade walked ahead of me, 3 paces, never looking back but adjusting her speed with perfect precision whenever I slowed. She brought me to a room near the ship center. Not a cell. I want to be clear about that, because my heart had tightened slightly in the transit point when I considered what trusting a being I'd met 2 hours ago might mean. It was a room with a bed that was designed, visibly and thoughtfully, for human proportions, with a viewport that looked out at stars, and a small table with something that translated, through a shipwide system the first blade activated with a word, as an offer of food and water. "The Queen will receive you when she is ready," the first blade said. "That may be today. It may be tomorrow. Do not interpret delay as dismissal." Understood. I set my bag down. Then, I said, "Can I ask you something?" She waited. "When you were in my room, before I woke up, how long had you been there?" The first blade considered whether to answer. I could see the calculation, not evasion, but the genuine assessment of what information served the situation. 4 hours, she said. 4 hours standing at the foot of my bed. Yes. And the Velshar arrived approximately 40 minutes before you woke. It was attempting to bypass my presence. It believed I was unaware of it. Were you? No. Flat, simple. I heard it enter the building. I allowed it to approach because I needed to understand its method before acting. A Velshar repelled without its method understood will return differently. I needed to see how it moved. You used me as bait, I said. The 4 eyes held mine without flinching. I used the situation to gather information that will protect you more effectively in the future. I had full confidence in my ability to intervene before contact was made. A pause. I understand if the distinction does not comfort you. I thought about it. It actually does, I said. A little. She studied me. The top pair of eyes narrowed fractionally. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Fear. Argument. Demands for immediate return to your dwelling. She paused. Most beings, confronted with the events of tonight, do not ask questions. They react. I'm reacting, I said. I'm just doing it quietly. Something shifted in her expression. It was not quite a smile. Her facial structure didn't move that way, but the top pair of eyes softened slightly at their outer edges, and the light they cast warmed by a few degrees. That, she said, is something the Queen will want to know. She left me then, stepping through the door with the same smooth efficiency she'd used to step between me and the Velshar. The door sealed behind her without sound. I sat on the edge of the human-proportioned bed and looked out the viewport at the stars and thought about a storm drain and a child with inhuman eyes who had remembered every word I'd said while I was too scared to remember saying them. The Queen did not come the next day. She came that night, in the quiet hours, when the ship's lights had shifted to their dim cycle and the corridors outside my room had grown still. I was awake. I hadn't slept well, not from fear, exactly, but from the kind of alertness that comes when the brain refuses to accept that the situation is stable enough to power down. I was sitting in the chair by the viewport when the door opened. The first blade entered first. 3 steps, position taken at the left side of the door. Then, the Queen came in. I had expected the same scale as the first blade, or larger. The Queen of a spacefaring species ought, in the part of my brain that runs on narrative logic, to be large. Commanding. Physically overwhelming. She was smaller than her guard. Slender, in dark robes that moved like water around her, with the same 4-eyed configuration as the first blade but eyes that were a deeper color, amber shifted toward gold, almost orange at the edges. She moved with a quietness that wasn't the quiet of someone trying not to be heard. It was the quiet of someone who had learned, over a very long time, that they did not need to announce themselves. She stopped 4 feet away from me and looked at me with all 4 eyes at once. I stood up. I don't know what made me do it, some instinct that felt older than manners. I stood up and I faced her and I did not look away. The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then, she said something, and the translator at her collar, smaller than the first blades, more elegant, rendered it. You pulled her out with cut hands. The grate was sharp, I said. It didn't seem important at the time. She watched your blood in the water, and she asked you if you were hurt, and you told her you were fine and kept working. I remembered that. Vaguely. The child's voice, small and precise, cutting through the noise of the flood. She was very composed, I said. I was trying to match her energy. The Queen's eyes moved across my face. She has not stopped speaking of you, she said. She describes you as someone who acts without calculating the cost first. A pause. In our culture, that quality has a specific name. It translates, approximately, as soul clear. The room was very still. The Velshar that came for you was sent by a faction within my council, the Queen said. Her voice was even. Absolutely controlled. But, beneath it, like pressure beneath still water, was something that made the first blade's hand move, just slightly, toward the edge of her armor. They wish to eliminate the reason my daughter believes in the goodness of species beyond our own. They thought removing you would close a door she has begun to walk through. The implications of that landed slowly, one layer at a time. They tried to kill me, I said, because a child likes me. They tried to kill you because a child who will one day rule 47 inhabited systems has begun to believe that interspecies trust is not a strategic weakness. The Queen held my gaze. That terrifies certain people considerably. What happens to them? The faction. That is being addressed. The Queen said it the way the first blade had gestured at the Velshar, with quiet authority, no elaboration needed. What I came to tell you is this. She stepped forward, one step, closing the distance between us. Up close, her eyes were extraordinary. The light they cast was warm, almost amberlit, like firelight, but utterly steady. My daughter asked me to come myself. She said that if I sent an emissary, you would think the gratitude was political. She said you would know the difference. My throat felt tight. She's right, I said. I know. She is frequently right. It is occasionally inconvenient. Something moved across the Queen's face, affection, complicated and deep, the kind that only exists between a parent and a child who keeps exceeding every expectation while also causing every possible difficulty. She reached into the folds of her robe and withdrew something small. A disc, similar to the translator devices, but different in its material, darker, with a faint pattern pressed into its surface that I couldn't resolve into a clear image no matter how I focused. She held it out. I took it. It was warm. That is an oath marker, the first blade said, from her position by the door. Her voice was carefully neutral, but the words came out with a weight that made me look at her. She was watching the Queen with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, not surprise, but something close to it. Recognition, perhaps, of something unprecedented. It means that the protection she has offered you is permanent, not conditional, not political. A pause. It is the same oath she made to her daughter. The room was very quiet for a long moment. I looked at the disc in my hand. Then, I looked at the Queen. She had not looked away. All four eyes, steady and warm and absolutely direct. I pulled a child out of a drain, I said. Anyone would have. No, the Queen said simply. They would not. That is precisely the point. I closed my hand around the disc. I felt it pulse, once, against my palm, a slow, deep beat, like a second heartbeat synchronizing. The first blade will return you to your world tomorrow, the Queen said. You will live your life. But you will not live it unguarded. And, when my daughter is old enough to travel without escort, in approximately 4 of your years, she has requested permission to meet you properly. The Queen paused. She wants to thank you herself. She is very particular about that. I'd like that, I said. The Queen inclined her head. It was a small gesture, barely a degree of movement, but the weight behind it was enormous. Then she turned, and the first blade stepped aside, and she left the room as quietly as she had entered it. The first blade looked at me across the silence. Sleep, she said. Tomorrow the sun will be adequate. You will be safe. Will you be watching? I asked. She looked at me for a moment. Then, she said, I am always watching. She stepped out. The door sealed. I sat back down in the chair by the viewport and opened my hand and looked at the oath marker, pulsing slowly against my palm, warm as a living thing, binding me to a queen and a child and a future I couldn't have imagined 24 hours ago. Outside the viewport, the stars held still, the way they always do, ancient, patient, indifferent to the small remarkable things happening in the light. I held the oath marker until dawn, and I did not sleep, and I did not need to.